Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, December 12, 2023. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is in Washington meeting with U.S. senators, House Speaker and Minority Leader, and President Joe Biden, making the case for Congress to approve President Biden's $60 billion aid request for Ukraine. But Senate leaders say they're still far apart from a deal on U.S. border security and immigration changes that Republicans say must be attached to Ukraine aid. The House Rules Committee passes a resolution that would authorize an impeachment inquiry of President Biden. Full House vote expected on Wednesday. The House will no longer vote this week on reauthorizing the Section 702 program of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act after Speaker Johnson's plan to put two different reform proposals up for votes ran into Republican opposition because those Republicans wanted to offer their own amendments. Section 702 allows warrantless wiretaps of non-U.S. citizens in other countries, but has been controversial because of admitted past FBI abuse that led to U.S. citizens being targeted. The inflation report from the Labor Department, prices up 0.1% from October to November. It's a little slower of an increase than the month before. We'll hear from the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. Plus, a Senate subcommittee hearing with U.S. Coast Guard Academy whistleblowers who say they were sexually assaulted and harassed and the crimes were covered up. And the Smithsonian Institution Secretary Lonnie Bunch on the move to bring pandas back to the National Zoo. Story from the Washington Post: his country's future at stake. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky used inspirational words, resolve, and a nod to Christmas in appealing Tuesday to leaders in Congress for U.S. aid for his fighters in the war with Russia. But as he arrived next at the White House, additional American support was in grave doubt. Zelensky's visit to Washington came at a grim time. Much change from the hero's welcome he received last year. President Joe Biden's request for an additional $110 billion in U.S. aid for Ukraine, Israel, and other national security needs is at serious risk of collapse in Congress, as Republicans are insisting on linking it to strict U.S.-Mexico border security changes that Democrats decry. Zelensky repeatedly said in meetings, according to lawmakers, the fight we're in is a fight for freedom. That reporting from the Washington Post. After the early morning private meeting between President Zelensky and all U.S. senators, the Senate Democratic and Republican leaders spoke publicly about what they heard and what happens next. First, the Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, on the Senate floor.
Earlier this morning, Senator McConnell and I welcomed Ukrainian President Zelensky to the U.S. Senate, his third visit to the U.S. Capitol. It was a very powerful, enlightening, and positive meeting. President Zelensky's message was direct. Ukraine will win the war against Russia if more aid is approved. But the contrary was also true. If no more aid is approved, Putin will win. It's that simple. Ukraine, the West, United States' strength as a credible ally are all hanging in the balance right now. Also, President Zelensky urged that we need to pass this aid quickly, because if we don't pass it quickly, it'll send a signal to the whole world that we are abandoning Ukraine and could start a snowball cascading to Ukraine's detriment and to our detriment. If Ukraine falls, it will be a historic and colossal tragedy. If Russia is victorious, future generations will remember this as a moment of shame for the West, for the United States, and for those in the Senate who sought to block it. This is a moment when a friend in need called on our help. We must rise to the occasion. If we abandon Ukraine to the dark forces of autocracy, we will all pay a price. The price won't be tomorrow, meaning next week, but it will be in the months and years ahead, but will be an awful price. And everyone who voted against aid to Ukraine will have to live with it. This is a time for Republicans to be serious about reaching an agreement. Serious is the word we are saying to our Republican colleagues. It is not a time for one side to demand maximalist, fringe policies that they know are unrealistic and then say our way or the highway. If Republican colleagues want an agreement on the border, they must meet us at the middle. They need to show us they are serious. So far, when they just ask for H.R. 2 or something like it, they're not showing seriousness. There are two words to describe Democrats right now. Just like the Republican word should be, they need to be serious. The two words that describe Democrats right now, still trying. We are still trying to find a good faith compromise with Republicans, but they must do the same. Now, last night, I got on the phone with Speaker Johnson and urged him to keep the House in session, to give a supplemental a chance to come together. I told him that because over the last I told him that the House should stay in session, because over the past 24 hours I've been alarmed to see some of the same Republicans in the House and now a good number in the Senate who had previously demanded action on the border are now suggesting there's no urgency to act before Christmas. After months of saying the border is a crisis, that we must get something done yesterday, many Republicans now seemingly prefer to go home rather than pass a bill.
The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor after the morning meeting with senators and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Senator Schumer later told reporters that there would be an afternoon meeting with his aides, the two leading senators in the U.S. border security negotiations, Democrat Chris Murphy of Connecticut and Republican James Lankford of Oklahoma, plus the U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. The Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell at a news conference said he was inspired by President Zelensky's visit, but that the U.S. border security issue must be part of legislation to provide money to Ukraine to fight Russian forces, and they're not at a deal yet.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Obviously, we had an inspiring one-hour meeting with the President of Ukraine. I think there's overwhelming agreement that we need to deal with secure borders, whether it's the Ukraine border, the Israel border, or the U.S. border. I would remind everyone that the U.S. border was a part of the President's original request. So it's been viewed, at least by some people in the White House, that this ought to be part of this overall effort. Obviously, negotiating a border solution is very complicated. As you know, I designated James Lankford to be the lead on that. He and I spoke repeatedly over the weekend. The talks continue, but we're not there yet. Hopefully all of this can come together and we can deal with all of these national emergencies in the supplemental at the same time.
Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky at a news conference. Ukrainian President Zelensky posted on X after his meeting with the senators his thanks to Senator McConnell and the Majority Leader, Senator Schumer, quote, for their personal leadership in rallying bipartisan support for Ukraine among U.S. legislators. And he wrote, I informed members of the U.S. Senate about Ukraine's current military and economic situation, the significance of sustaining vital U.S. support, and answered their questions. President Zelensky then went over to the House side of the U.S. Capitol building to meet privately with the Speaker and the Minority Leader. Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, spoke to the press after.
Thank you all for being here. Just had a good meeting with President Zelensky. I reiterated to him that we stand with him and against Putin's brutal invasion. The American people stand for freedom, and they're on the right side of this fight. I have asked the White House since the day that I was handed the gavel as Speaker for clarity. We need a clear articulation of the strategy to allow Ukraine to win. And thus far, their responses have been insufficient. They have not provided us the clarity and the detail that we requested over and over since literally 24 hours after I was handed the gavel as Speaker of the House. And so what the Biden administration seems to be asking for is billions of additional dollars with no appropriate oversight, no clear strategy to win, and none of the answers that I think the American people are owed. I have also made very clear from day one that our first condition on any national security supplemental spending package is about our own national security first. The border is an absolute catastrophe, and this is because of the policies of this White House and this administration. We had 12,000 illegal crossings on one day last week alone, on Wednesday. We have almost now 280 known terrorists that have been apprehended at the border. None of this counts the gotaways. If you add the numbers up, it's almost 7 million people who have been encountered at the border just since President Biden took office, and at least 2 million gotaways. This is twice the population of my state of Louisiana. Fentanyl is the leading cause of death for Americans age 18 to 49 in this country. Fentanyl poisoning, because it's allowed over the border. We have human trafficking and all the other terrible things. In the last 3 months, October, November, December alone, we've had more illegal crossings at the border than in any entire year during the Obama administration. The American people see this, they feel it acutely, they see all the terrible societal ills that come from this, and it must be addressed. So I've made this very clear, again, from the very beginning, when I was handed the gavel. We needed clarity on what we're doing in Ukraine and how we'll have proper oversight of the spending of precious taxpayer dollars of the American citizens, and we needed a transformative change at the border. Thus far, we've gotten neither. The Senate has been MIA on this. The House passed H.R. 2 6 months ago, more than 6 months ago. It's been sitting and collecting dust on Chuck Schumer's desk. I have told him personally, I've told the National Security Advisor, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, that these are our conditions because these are the conditions of the American people. And we are resolute on that. It is not the House's issue right now. The issue is with the White House and the Senate. And I implore them to do their job because the time is urgent and we do want to do the right thing here. With that, I'll
President Zelensky, thank you.
The House in session. House Speaker Mike Johnson with reporters, not taking any questions from them. The House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, was asked about President Zelensky's visit and U.S. border security during an interview at a Wall Street Journal conference in Washington.
President Zelensky is here today. I believe you met with him this morning. Can you look him in the eye and assure him that America still has Ukraine's back?
Well, good afternoon. It's great to be here. I think, what a way to start. I do think it's important, and certainly as House Democrats, we were very clear with the president, thanked him for his continued leadership, his partnership, the bravery of the Ukrainian war effort, the necessity of it continuing and America's support continuing. It's my understanding that the meeting between President Zelensky and the entirety of the Senate went well. Hopefully that will help the Senate arrive at an agreement sooner rather than later over the next few days because we have no choice, no option, but to continue to fund the Ukrainian war effort, both in the interests of America's national security, period, full stop, but also because Ukraine is on the side of a real existential conflict that is going on throughout the world, as the previous panel talked about. There's democracy versus autocracy, there's freedom versus tyranny, there's truth versus propaganda. And Ukraine is on the side of democracy, of freedom, and of truth, and we should make sure that we continue to stand with them.
The House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, at the Wall Street Journal CEO Council Summit being held in Washington today. From Associated Press, Ukraine came under heavy attack from the air and from cyberspace Tuesday, local officials said, as nearly 600 Russian shells, rockets, and other projectiles rained down on a southern region, and unidentified hackers knocked out phone and internet services of the country's biggest telecom provider. After the Ukrainian President Zelensky met with the congressional leaders, he went to the White House and met with President Biden in the Oval Office.
Well, Mr. President, welcome back.
Thank you so much.
Welcome back to the White House.
Thank you so much, Mr.
And the Oval Office. And it's great to be at your side once again. We're going to stay at your side. You know, we stand at a real inflection point in history. I know you and I have talked about this, where the decisions we make now are going to determine the future for decades to come, particularly in Europe. And this is one of those moments. Congress needs to pass a supplemental funding for Ukraine before they break for the holiday recess, before they give Putin the greatest Christmas gift they could possibly give him. And so because we've seen what happens when dictators don't pay the price for the damage and the death and the destruction they cause, and they keep going when no price is paid. The threats to America, to Europe, and the world will only keep rising if we don't act. And I intend that we act. The American people, Democrats and Republicans, alike, I think, understand this, and they understand the very real fight that's going on right now. In the winter, this winter, Putin plans once again to bombard Ukraine's electric grid, intends to, with rockets, plunging families into darkness in the coldest part of the year, and doing great damage. We can't and won't let him succeed. We mustn't let him succeed in that. Mr. President, I called on Congress to do the right thing, to stand with Ukraine and to stand up for freedom. And I want to thank you for being here. You're going to help the cause, and I don't want you giving up.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, dear journalists. I'm really glad to be here at the White House today and share some very important messages. Thank you for the invitation, and I'd like to thank America and our partners for the support. And today, the special day, really special day for Ukrainian people. It's a day of our land forces. Almost 600,000 incredibly brave Ukrainian sons and daughters are on the battlefield, and they were powerful. This is their day, and really, they prove every day that Ukraine can win. And our forces are advancing, and we have successfully defeated Russia in the Black Sea, and Russia is hiding the remnants of its naval fleet in remote base. And meanwhile, Ukraine has set up an export corridor in the Black Sea that's really boosting our economy and global food security. Yesterday, I met with the IMF and World Bank, and they're impressed with the Ukraine's economic growth, almost 5%, and that's significant. Ukraine is gradually becoming less dependent on aid, and we are moving to the right direction, and I want to discuss with the President how to strengthen it, especially enhancing our air defense and ability to destroy Russia's logistics. Our goals for 24 are clear: take away Russia's superiority and disrupt their offensive operations. And I think it's real. And also some other important things. I met with the heads of American defense companies yesterday. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Really powerful companies. I thank them and thanks all the workers, engineers, managers who built the strengths of American weapons, helping Ukraine boost the development of arsenals of democracy. President Biden agreed, and we spoke about it in September, to joint weapon co-production is very important for us, and we'll discuss how to speed up this. And we also need to work faster with the frozen Russian assets, over 300 billion frozen assets from terrorists, and we should use it to protect against Russian terror. And I want to talk about some details regarding our reforms and EU integration. Ukraine continues to reform its institutions even during the war. It's very important for us, and we are successful. I think that's very important, and people need to be confident that freedom is secure and strong enough to win. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you. Before the press, whoa, hush up a second, okay? I got one more thing to say. I've just signed another $200 million drawdown from the Department of Defense for Ukraine, and that'll be coming quickly. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
In the White House Oval Office, President Joe Biden and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The two later held a joint news conference, and President Biden spoke about his request for aid for Ukraine and the congressional Republican desire to have U.S. border security attached to that.
Today, Ukraine's freedom is on the line, but if we don't stop Putin, it will endanger the freedom of everyone, almost everywhere. Putin will keep going, and would-be aggressors everywhere will be emboldened to try to take what they can by force. Mr. President, I'll not walk away from Ukraine, and neither will the American people. A clear bipartisan majority of people across the United States and in Congress support your country. They understand, as I do, that Ukraine's success and its ability to deter aggression in the future are vital to security for the world at large. And I have repeatedly made clear from our first day in office, we also need Ukraine to make changes to fix the broken immigration system here. We also need Congress to make the changes to fix the broken immigration system here at home. My team is working with Senate Democrats and Republicans to try to find a bipartisan compromise, both in terms of changes in policy and provide the resources we need to secure the border. Compromise is how democracy works, and I'm ready and offered compromise already. Holding Ukraine funding hostage in an attempt to force through an extreme Republican partisan agenda on the border is not how it works. We need real solutions.
President Biden at a joint news conference with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. At that news conference, the Ukrainian president was asked whether he heard what he needed to hear when he visited Capitol Hill and spoke to Senate leaders and House leaders about that aid package. You're going to hear part of his answer through an interpreter.
If I heard what I want, I heard a lot. Surely I told what I wanted to. I feel and experience this support from President Biden administration, from senators, and we've been talking with the speaker. I got these signals. They were more than positive, but we know that we have to separate words and particular result. Therefore, we will count on particular result. Thank you.
Through an interpreter, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the joint news conference with President Biden. The Russian government-funded news site TASS has an article that reads, regardless of what happens at today's meeting between President Joe Biden of the U.S. and President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, Russia will stay the course with its special military operation, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters. They again quote him, it's certainly important that everyone realize the tens of billions of dollars that were previously pumped into Ukraine did not help it achieve any success on the battlefield. The tens of billions of dollars that Ukraine wants to be pumped into its economy will be equally doomed. We understand perfectly how well this process goes. It cannot change the situation on the battlefield or the course of the special military operation. Of this, we are certain. That from a Russian government spokesperson through the website TASS. This is Washington Today. From NBC News, House Republicans are eyeing a vote Wednesday to formalize the impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden. Two sources familiar with the matter told NBC. Before the floor vote, the resolution to authorize the inquiry is set to go before the House Rules Committee on Tuesday, even as Republicans have failed to come up with the direct evidence of wrongdoing by Biden. A separate resolution going before the Rules Committee would declare that any subpoenas issued after ousted Speaker Kevin McCarthy declared the impeachment inquiry on September 27th, but before this week's vote in the full House, carry the same legal weight as subpoenas issued after the vote. That from NBC News. C-SPAN covered the Rules Committee meeting today. Here is the chair, Tom Cole, Republican of Oklahoma.
It is a deeply sad day and is an occasion I do not relish, nor, I am sure, do any of my colleagues in the room. Nonetheless, this is a weighty responsibility, one that we all take very seriously, and we must do our duty for ourselves, for the institution, and for the nation. We are here to determine a process, not an outcome. We are here to assert our Article I responsibilities, not to act as judge or jury. And we are here fundamentally to chart a path forward that unveils the facts to the public. Committees in the House have been engaged in investigating. As they continue to pursue transparency and accountability, we are formalizing their impeachment inquiry efforts to give the House the strongest legal standing to pursue needed information and enforce subpoenas. Allowing this chamber to be at the apex of its constitutional power is vital to our system of checks and balances. I will briefly summarize the procedures today's resolution establishes for the inquiry. First, it charges the Committee on Oversight and Reform, the Committee on Ways and Means, and the Committee on the Judiciary with continuing the existing inquiry. It provides procedures for conducting hearings and calling and questioning witnesses. It grants the minority equal time to question and request witnesses. It ensures investigating committees can prepare and transmit reports and documents to the Committee on the Judiciary, which traditionally considers impeachment. It gives the President and his counsel opportunities to participate in proceedings before the Committee on the Judiciary. Finally, it authorizes the Committee on the Judiciary to report to the House of Representatives resolutions, articles of impeachment, or other recommendations.
Congressman Tom Cole, Republican from Oklahoma, Rules Committee Chair. The impeachment inquiry so far, as he laid out in those three committees, is focused on alleged interactions by President Biden with his son Hunter's overseas business dealings. The Rules Committee ranking Democrat is James McGovern of Connecticut.
When I was chairman of this committee, Donald Trump was impeached twice. Both times I took it very seriously. His first impeachment was because he tried to blackmail a foreign leader into digging up dirt on then-candidate Joe Biden. He wanted to stop Joe Biden from becoming president. His second impeachment, the most bipartisan in history, was because he tried to overturn the election by sending a violent mob here to the Capitol to stop us from certifying Joe Biden's victory as the Constitution requires us to do. He wanted to stop Biden from taking office. Thankfully, he failed. But now Republicans are back at it again, trying to hurt Joe Biden, this time by abusing and weaponizing the impeachment process itself. All of this is happening because House Republican leaders refuse to abide by the election results. They're upset Trump lost. He's upset he lost. Some of them still don't even believe he lost. Many of them are upset that the insurrection didn't succeed on January 6th. And today, they want to finish the job. And what's left in the toolbox? An impeachment stunt they want to hang around Joe Biden's neck to tarnish him as he heads into the next election. They think it will muddy the waters and confuse people who know in their gut that Trump is a criminal and Joe Biden is an honest, decent man. Let me tell Republicans right now, you will fail. Because the simple truth is your whole so-called investigation is built on a lie. Republicans began this ludicrous exercise the second they took control of this House of Representatives, the very second they took control. And it's been a big, colossal waste of time ever since. It's been a pathetic joke. Not a single witness, not a shred of evidence that says Joe Biden did anything wrong. Every single Republican allegation has been debunked and discredited and disproven. Their own legal experts say there's not enough evidence to impeach. Their blistering bombshell key witness, he turned out to be a Chinese spy. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
Congressman James McGovern, the top Democrat on the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee did pass this resolution by a party line vote, 9-4, sending it to the House floor. And debate and vote on that expected on Wednesday. A headline at Axios.com reads that House Republicans are securing the support they need to pass a resolution formalizing their impeachment inquiry into President Biden. Several Biden district Republicans who previously voiced skepticism of impeachment told Axios on Monday they plan to vote for the inquiry. Congressman Jason Smith, Republican of Missouri, chairs the Ways and Means Committee, one of the three House committees who've been conducting the impeachment inquiry of President Biden so far. He told Fox News today he thinks the full House will pass that resolution that came out of the Rules Committee.
Does Mike Johnson have the votes?
I believe so, without a doubt. But I also would disagree. I think we've had the votes the whole time if we were going to move forward with an impeachment inquiry, Sandra. The issue is the White House has continued to stonewall all of our requests for information. In fact, we subpoenaed 2 DOJ tax investigators to come before Congress. And what happened? The White House, the administration prevented them to coming forward. They sent us a letter saying that they're not going to comply unless there's a formal vote of an impeachment inquiry. That's exactly what we're going to do tomorrow to make sure that we have 100% capability of getting all the information that we need to in this investigation.
To be clear, I mean, former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy avoided a formal vote because he didn't have the votes, correct?
I believe we didn't do the vote because we didn't find it to be necessary. If you look at what's happened in the past, Nancy Pelosi started a formal impeachment inquiry without having a formal vote.
Congressman Jason Smith, Republican from Missouri, Ways and Means Committee chair today on Fox News. House Republicans currently have a 3-vote margin over Democrats. This story from TheHill.com, grumbling over Speaker Mike Johnson's plans for a floor showdown on competing House Intelligence and Judiciary Committee bills, has punted the debate over how to reform the nation's warrantless surveillance powers. House Rules Committee pulled consideration of the 2 bills after a GOP conference meeting that was staged as a debate over reforming Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which allows the government to spy on foreigners overseas. But the differences between the 2 pieces of legislation took a back seat to Johnson's plan for resolving a months-long standoff over how to reconcile differences between the two bills, thwarting his plan for a Queen of the Hill battle that would bring both of them to the floor for a vote. While the unusual process would allow consideration of both bills, it would not allow for amendments, alarming members who want to hash out differences between the two approaches. That was from thehill.com, and Speaker Johnson was asked about it today.
On FISA, can you kind of delve into your thought process going through that? You changed your mind multiple times on exactly whether it be a short-term extension or not, then you changed your mind yesterday on Queen of the Hill situation. Can you just walk us through how that thought process?
I didn't change my mind on FISA. See, FISA is a very important piece of legislation, and Section 702, which would expire at the end of the year, is a really, really important provision because it protects us on the homeland. It protects us from terrorist attacks. It's the tool that we use to uncover those plots when they're being planned, and it's been very, very effective in that measure. And that's why you have conservatives and liberals, progressives, who agree that it's a really important tool. What we all also agree on is that it must be dramatically reformed because it's been abused 287,000 times, I think, between 2020 and 2021. The FBI did queries on American citizens in violation of that law and our basic civil liberties. So we have this very important matter to determine and resolve, and you have lots of different opinions on where that is. We have two committees of jurisdiction, Judiciary and the Intelligence Committee, who have worked up different measures, different bills. We've only had the text of those for 4 or 5 days, something like that, about a week, and here we are near the end of the deadline. Now, as soon as I became Speaker, we knew the deadline was coming, and I brought those committees together. They were working from a working group, a task force that was put forward by 3 members of both committees that worked for about 6 months. Y'all may have seen, I think you have, they came up with about 45 reforms that would resolve all of these issues, but about 4 or 5 of those key reforms, there's a disagreement between the two committees. We're working towards consensus, but this is a very, very serious matter. This isn't some minor policy in our law. This is about keeping Americans safe, and so we take the responsibility seriously. As recently as last night, we were in a room with all the interested parties and House Republicans there, and there's still some disagreement about a couple of those key provisions. So I am not one who wants to rush this. I don't think we can make a mistake in this. I think we've got to do it right, and so we're going to allow the time to do that. So having a short-term extension on the NDAA allows us the time to work not only in our own chamber, but with the other chamber as well, to come forward with a compromise provision that will not only keep us safe, but will also safeguard our civil liberties. Both of those objectives must be achieved, and that's why it's taken a long time. Again, as I said at the outset, and I'll close with this, democracy is messy sometimes, but we have to get it right. We're the greatest delivery body in the world, and we're going to do our job and do it well. Sometimes it takes more time than we would like, but it's worth it to get it right, especially on a product as important as FISA. So that's what we're going to do. Thank you all for your time.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, at a news conference, he mentioned that an extension of the current Section 702 program, which expires at the end of the month, would be included in the NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, the annual Defense Policy and Programs Bill. It would be about a 4-month extension through April, but some Republicans have already said they'll oppose the NDAA based upon inclusion of that extension. House Freedom Caucus Chair Congressman Scott Perry, Republican of Pennsylvania, also spoke to reporters today about the decision to not take up the competing FISA Section 702 reform bills this week. He was outside the House Republican Conference meeting this morning.
The HSC has come out against 702. What's going on, sir?
The government keeps on spying on Americans, and members of the HFC are sick of it, and we intend to do something about it, which is not continue to allow that.
Where do things stand now with 702 reauthorization?
Right now, it's there's no bill going to be on the floor this week, which is potentially a good sign, but we'll see what happens from there.
Has it been added to the NDAA?
Now it has, and we don't know if that's going to pass or not, so that's an issue. I got to run.
Thank you, sir.
Congressman Scott Perry, Republican from Pennsylvania, with reporters. Washington Today continues in a moment.
People often think C-SPAN is funded by the federal government. In fact, we're a nonprofit organization that receives no government funding. As news consumption changes, you can help ensure the future of C-SPAN's unfiltered coverage of national government and politics. We hope you will consider making a tax-deductible contribution that will support our daily editorial operations. To learn more, visit cspan.org/donate.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. A few more headlines. The Senate has confirmed former National Security Agency Executive Director Harry Coker Jr. as the new National Cyber Director, a White House advisory position. Vote in the Senate was 59 to 40, 8 Republicans voting yes. Bill Cassidy, Susan Collins, Kevin Cramer, Roger Marshall, Jerry Moran, Lisa Murkowski, Mike Rounds, and Dan Sullivan. And from Stat News, the U.S. House passed a relatively major health care package late Monday, an end-of-the-year victory after the same policies had to be yanked from consideration in September because they lacked bipartisan support. The bill passed the House on a bipartisan 320 to 71 vote. The health care package would equalize payment between hospital outpatient departments and doctors' offices for administering medicines in Medicare, rein in some practices by pharmacy benefit managers, and codify healthcare price transparency rules. It would also stave off pay cuts for safety net hospitals and fund community health centers. That from Stat News. This story from Yahoo Finance. Inflation cooled in November on an annual basis, bolstering investor hopes that the Federal Reserve will hold interest rates steady at its policy meeting this week. But price increases did tick up on a monthly basis, adding to the debate over whether the central bank will start to lower rates as inflation eases back toward its 2% target. According to the latest data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, prices rose 3.1% over the prior year in November, a slight deceleration from October's 3.2% annual gain. Prices ticked up slightly at 0.1% over last month. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen asked about the report at the Wall Street Journal CEO Council Summit in Washington.
Let's start with the inflation report that just came out. Inflation has been much better behaved in the second half of the year. Headline inflation is down to 3.1% in November from 9.1% in June of last year. Core prices rose last month 0.3% from October. That's a 3.5% annualized rate. Is inflation vanquished?
It's certainly meaningfully coming down, and I see no reason on the path that we're currently on why inflation shouldn't gradually decline to levels that are consistent with the Fed's mandate and targets. So supply chain issues that resulted from the pandemic and mismatches and disruption in labor markets both seem to be healing. As that happens, inflation's moved down. The labor market, while it remains very strong, obviously we've had 22 months now with below 4% inflation, which is quite a phenomenon. I think we haven't seen that in about 50 years. Still, the labor market is cooling some as job openings come down. The intensity of hiring is diminished some, but of course we haven't seen layoffs, and we have excellent job creation, labor force participation increasing. And at this point, with inflation down so much and wage increases continuing at a healthy pace, real wages are rising. I believe we saw this morning that real average hourly earnings are up 1.4% over the last year.
The Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen interviewed by Wall Street Journal chief economics correspondent Nick Timiraos at the Wall Street Journal CEO Council Summit in Washington, D.C. On Wall Street, the Dow up 173, NASDAQ up 100, and S&P up 21. 4 women who went to the U.S. Coast Guard Academy, 3 over the past decade, 1 a current cadet, testified today that they were sexually assaulted and it was covered up. CNN writes the hearing before the Senate's Committee on Homeland Security's Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations was sparked by CNN's reporting on how the agency leaders buried the results of a secret investigation dubbed Operation Fouled Anchor that substantiated dozens of sexual assaults at the Coast Guard Academy. The subcommittee chair is Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, where the Coast Guard is located. Here's questioning to retired Lieutenant Melissa McCafferty.
Let me ask you, Lieutenant McCafferty, you described that trip to New York that you took with a fellow cadet. One factor that impacts a cadet's decision to report or not to report is the fear of being punished for collateral misconduct, whether it's drinking or taking a trip with another cadet. Was that a fear among your fellow cadets in deciding not to report? And I'll ask the same question of others who are here.
Thank you for that question, Senator. Yes, that was absolutely a fear of mine. I had knowingly gone to New York City with an upper-class cadet, and we have very strict fraternization rules, so I was aware of that. And I take responsibility, and for years, I actually blamed myself for what happened because I made my decision. I made that decision. And in terms of the culture, I had repeatedly over the years, my 4 years at the academy, seen countless cadets penalized for minor infractions, I would argue minor infractions, that ultimately led to a sexual assault or a rape. I have witnessed male cadets, one of whom was date raped, found in a basement, completely naked. No one was ever held accountable, and he was restricted for imbibing alcohol. Another classmate was restricted after reporting a rape for drinking alcohol. Another classmate never reported a rape because she too drank alcohol. The focus and the priorities belie logic here. Like, you don't have to be a scientist to know that when a rape occurs, you do not blame the person for ingesting alcohol no matter what the amount. And in my case, even though I went to New York City, I was stone cold sober. I had nothing to drink. But yet the fear they instill in us and the ability to skate on any level of accountability is breathtaking. They will use whatever means they can to downplay the action, and they will penalize the victim who speaks up with the courage and integrity to speak the truth. And having worked for the Commandant myself, I have worked in the front office, I have worked for these officers, I have seen these senior leaders in action. This culture is not isolated to the academy. When I say senior leaders, I use those words deliberately. I use those words very precisely, because these senior leaders currently, and those who have since been honorably retired or quietly asked to resign, continue in this behavior. They continue to pick and choose which infraction to enforce and upon whom, many of which are defenseless enlisted members, young and mid-grade officers, and none of them are themselves. I have attached in my written reports at least 10 accounts from women currently in the fleet who have had countless times and interactions with admirals and above, documenting their behavior, their abhorrent behavior, and yet no one has come forward and held each other accountable. I am well aware of this issue. It is not isolated to the academy, and like my colleague Jen has stated, it has been issued time and time and time again. In every single report, we have the data, we have the analytics, but the unspoken and the unwritten rule is the Flag Corps and the captains will look out only for themselves. They will not hold each other accountability, and they will not exercise their authority under the UCMJ. And either they are incapable or otherwise unwilling to do so. Every single time we have these discussions, we end up here today promising future-oriented action. Faith in the Coast Guard within its own members is destroyed. It is not eroded, it is destroyed. And the only way senior leaders can even hope to fix this is to go through every single member of the Flag Corps who was involved in these disgraceful cover-ups, to bring them out of retirement, which they have the authority to do, and to hold them accountable under the UCMJ.
Retired Coast Guard Lieutenant Melissa McCafferty, questioned by Senator Richard Blumenthal, subcommittee chair at today's hearing. Last week, the Coast Guard issued a report acknowledging they had failed to keep our people safe and ordered changes in the service handling of sexual assault cases. Lonnie Bunch, secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, testified today before the House Administration Committee. Smithsonian says it's the world's largest museum, education, and research complex, 21 museums, plus the National Zoo, over 150 million artifacts, a budget of $1.1 billion. The committee chair, Brian Stile, Republican from Wisconsin, asked the secretary about pandas. The National Zoo has none for the first time since 1972, after 3 were returned to China last month.
My nieces and nephews out to D.C. recently. They got to see the pandas before they departed. I can tell you, for our kids, love the pandas. But as we dive in and we think about what's called panda diplomacy, if you will, there's a policy side to this as well. One is, as I understand it, the National Zoo paid China $10 million to loan the giant pandas for 10 years. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And then that loan was extended throughout that time, beginning from 2000 all the way through until this year?
We negotiate every year, yes, to extend the loan.
And is there a consideration to extend that if the pandas came back then? Is that an ongoing negotiation?
We would like to have the pandas back, and we would like to negotiate with the Chinese to do just that.
And at any time, has the Smithsonian ever changed or compromised any public content to appease or accommodate China or any other foreign government?
Definitely not.
And do you have policies in place to ensure that would happen during the negotiation?
We do, and then we also make sure that as part of the negotiations, the staff recognizes that this is really about the science and the pandas, and not basically compromise our status in working with the Chinese.
Lonnie Bunch, Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, testifying before the House Administration Committee, questioned by the chair, Brian Stile. The secretary brought along some artifacts from the institution's collection, including Mary Todd Lincoln's mourning watch to remind her of her husband after his assassination, World War I trench art, and a Wisconsin cheesehead from the 1990s. The chair, Brian Stile, is Republican from Wisconsin. On Capitol Hill today, a bipartisan menorah lighting on this 6th night of Hanukkah. All four House and Senate bipartisan leaders were there. Speaker Mike Johnson, Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, and in the Senate, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, and the Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. And lighting the menorah, Rabbi Levi Shemtov, Executive Vice President of American Friends of Lubavitch, who made some remarks.
You're going to notice that there's one candle that's not in a row with the others. That's called the shamash, the utility candle, because at homes and in situations which have more space, it is used to light the other candles. The shamash is also indicative of the public servant, the one who gives their life in the service of others, basically the people who fill this very building. And therefore, all of us, while we have our lives of our own illumination, must find a way to illuminate something beyond ourselves. Because the thing about light is, it's not like funds, that when it's reduced to help someone else, there's less. When you light another candle, the original one is just as luminary. So as a human being, if you help somebody else, you brighten their life, you're not losing anything. They're gaining, in which case you're also gaining. And if our nation comes together and focuses on our strengths, even if we still retain our opinions, we'll only become a greater nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, which is what we all live for here. And I want to, of course, acknowledge the family members who are here of a baby not even a year old who is in captivity. And that nonsense is just intolerable. So when we light the menorah, we have to remember that this light will also cure that darkness. And we all pray together, each in our own way, that God Almighty will help us. Because atop the dome of this very building are the words for the glory of God. And we all live for the glory of God. So whatever we do in here, at the top of the very dome of this building, those are the words that tell us why we do it. So I'm going to tell you how we're going to light it and then invite the leaders to come and join me, please. And I'll just say a word of thanks to Senator Schumer, because this is his menorah, and he lent it to us for this very celebration. The first of its kind, I will tell you, to ever happen in the United States, especially in Congress. Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who's here, was the chairman of the Democratic Party and lit a menorah together with Eric Cantor, who was the majority leader at the time in the House. But we've never had both leaders of both houses together. This is really a first. So please, if we can come together here.
Rabbi Levi Shemtov, Executive Vice President of American Friends of Lubavitch, at the bipartisan menorah lighting on Capitol Hill. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's free evening newsletter, word for word, and get the stories and the headlines in Washington, D.C. sent to your inbox every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.